What I wanted to say, start, is that we live in a very interesting moment in history. And our society is now in the midst of a number of intersecting crises. Everybody reads about this in the newspapers, you hear it all the time in the news. Global climate change, we're running into limits of resources, water, land, energy. At the same time, we have an aging population throughout, not just the United States, throughout the Western world, and together with that, an epidemic of obesity, and the combination of those two is leading to an unprecedented increase in the burden of disease, in spiraling healthcare costs that threaten the economy of the Western world. And the Chinese say that, historically, that it said that crisis equals opportunity. And I believe that what we put in our mouths, every forkful, offers each of us an opportunity to directly and immediately challenge and work to help solve each of these intersecting crises. Looking at one specific crisis that's going on, the obesity epidemic. Back in the early 1980s, the Centers for Disease Control started to collect data from individual states on the rates of obesity. And in most states, back in the mid-80s when they first had data compiled, they only had collected it in a handful of states. And obesity is defined as a body mass index, which is weight divided by height, of over 30, which means for a 5'4" person, woman, it would be about 30 pounds overweight. That would be considered obese. And in a handful of states, it was found that somewhere between 10 and 15% of the population was obese. Most states, they weren't even measuring it, and the rest of the states were less than 10%. And there's been a dramatic, incredible increase in just a handful of years. It's happened in our lifetimes very quickly. I'm just going to go through these slides, and look what happens to the map. More and more states are measuring the level of obesity, and we're looking at more and more states having higher and higher rates. More and more dark blue states with over 10% to 15%. Year by year, it's like an epidemic taking over the country. Now we're starting to see, in the beginning of the 90s, we're starting to see a few states where the rate is creeping up toward 20%. Now, by the late 90s, we're starting to see some states where the rate is over 20%, approaching 25%. Now, see Mississippi, the first bellwether state, over a quarter of the population is obese, not overweight, obese, which is full of health consequences. In the last year that the Centers for Disease Control had data for are showing that a good portion of the country, over 25%, and we're approaching now 35% in a number of states. This is a huge problem, and you take it together with the aging of the population, and it's leading to incredible increases in diseases like diabetes and cancers. A number of cancers have obesity as a component. It's now known, and may drive the progression of some cancers. It's now also considered a risk factor for heart disease, for autoimmune disease. Fat tissue is incredibly metabolically active and is a place where inflammatory mediators get produced that act on the rest of the body. So if we look at the 10 leading causes of death, what jumps out here is two in particular, the dark green and the light green. It's heart disease and cancer. It accounts for more than half of all deaths, maybe about 60% of all deaths in the United States. And yet if we listen to the news, we get the impression, well, heart disease and cancer do play a role, but boom, 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 boom. It's homicide, it's suicide, it's, terrorist attacks. But it's so disproportionate to what's really going on. What's really going on is that we're killing ourselves with our forks. So what are the main causes of not just obesity, but a number of health consequences related to that. Well, clearly, plethora of junk foods, of fast foods, and interesting, notice a couple on this slide. You see the French fries and the soft drink. French fries are full of sugar, of salt, and the soft drink is full of sugar. Most Americans don't even know what the bitter taste is, or pungent taste. We're clueless. It's salt and sugar, maybe a little sour, but basically we don't expose ourselves to the full array of tastes and flavors. We give our kids breakfast, which is dessert. We feed ourselves the same kind of way. We've lost touch with human food. There are people who consider this to be health food. Now, that's not to say that everything is diet. There are clearly other causes. In my view, diet is a preeminent, maybe the preeminent risk factor, but clearly smoking, sedentary lifestyle habits, stressful living circumstances, exposure to toxins in the environment, all of these things play a role. But looking at diet more specifically, what is the problem with our diet? Well, there are some who say that the problem is that we have too much fat in our diet, or the wrong kinds of fats, too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. Others will say, no, we have too much sugar, particularly high fructose corn syrup, or too much white flour. Others will say it can be directly linked to the amount of meat that we eat. We consume too many grams per day of animal protein. Others will say it's the chemicals in our food, the additives, these unnatural substances that have been added. And yet others will say we lack fiber in our diet. Where are the micronutrients? We eat foods that are grown in depleted soils, and then we refine the remaining micronutrients out of the foods. Now, if we look at the United States and the Western world in comparison to other countries, in a disease that I have spent some time focusing on, prostate cancer, we see something quite dramatic jumping out of the international epidemiologic data. We see, on the one hand, countries, third world countries, Asian countries, countries where the dietary pattern is very low on the food chain, where food is not highly processed and refined, where they don't have gobs and gobs of fat and calories. Countries like China in particular, compare that, the rate of prostate cancer, with that of North America. The rate of prostate cancer is about 80 to 100 times greater in the United States than it is in China. Now, some of this may be due to age differences in the populations, differences in access to medical care and diagnostic differences, but even when we age adjust the populations, take the age out of the issue here, and when we look at the differences in medical care before the advent of PSA testing or screening for prostate cancer, these differences were there years ago, and they're still there. Not as much as China westernizes its diet, but still strikingly different. When you see differences like this, it really grabs you. And interestingly, when Asians, like Chinese and Japanese folks, move to the United States, within one generation, the migrants themselves who come here, their rates are about 500 to 1,000% greater than they are in China or in Japan. The second generation, their children, even if they're born without, of parents who are purely Japanese or purely Chinese, their rates are almost identical to Caucasian Americans. So Colin Campbell, the author of the China study, argues that, and he's a researcher who's been in this field looking at this for decades, looking at the epidemiologic data that I was just alluding to, and also experimental data that he has collected and done for years. He argues that the problem is too much food of animal origin, and protein in particular. When he would take mice that were bearing prostate tumors or other types, mammary tumors, colon tumors, and didn't matter how he caused those tumors to form, whether he exposed the mice to radiation, chemical carcinogens, tumor viruses, whatever, spontaneously occurring, either way, when he fed them excess protein, the cancers would take off and grow. When he put them on a low animal protein diet, The cancer stabilized, in some cases remitted. Which leads me to think, isn't it ironic that oftentimes people who are on a plant-based diet will be asked, where do you get your protein from? But look at who's asking the question. On the other hand, Robert Luftig at UC San Francisco, an endocrinologist who's been much in the news lately, has been arguing that the problem is sugar and refined carbohydrate, especially high fructose corn syrup, where we've introduced that into the diet in the last 30 years, correlating very closely with how the rates of obesity have taken off. He argues that sugar is a poison. Not beating around the bush here. It's a poison, he says. And he said that if you look at it, sugar gets very efficiently stored as fat in the body. It tricks the brain into thinking that we're still hungry even after we've eaten and eaten and eaten. We don't develop satiety. We don't know that we're full, so we keep eating. And it's toxic to the liver. It's a hepatotoxin. It damages liver cells. Now, I would argue that looking on one extreme, not extreme, but looking at one perspective on the end of the continuum, Colin Campbell's work, others who've said that it's animal protein, others have said fat, Luftig says too much sugar. I'd say we're a little bit like the 7 blind men and the elephant. They're all right. The elephant is the standard American diet. The trunk, as Luftig would say, is too much sugar. The tail is too much protein. And bear in mind that the elephant has several other limbs and a trunk and a torso and all that. And all of these are factors. They're all describing a part of this whole beast, the standard American diet. And either way, I would argue the solution is the same, and that's to consume a whole food, plant-based diet. You're going to reduce sugar, you're going to reduce or eliminate white flour. Animal foods will be greatly reduced, if not eliminated for people who follow a vegan or pure vegetarian version of this. You're going to eliminate fat, reduce greatly fat, eliminate saturated fat, reduce calories. We will even reduce calories by following this to about 2/3 of what you would normally have, which leads to decreases in body weight. Interestingly, when we look at a number of common adult cancers, they're all greatly worsened by obesity. The recurrence of breast cancer is nearly doubled in women who are obese. In prostate cancer, there's increasing evidence that prostate cancer progression is driven by excess body weight. When we take lab animals and we restrict their caloric intake to about, interestingly, about 2/3 of ad libitum, what they would eat if they would just have anything, the cancers very commonly, for almost a century, these studies have shown that the cancers will stabilize and in some cases go into remission. So a few other things I would suggest is to eat food that is locally grown and in season. So in California, we're blessed. We have 3 growing seasons, so this is very easy for us here. In other areas, it's a little harder, but it's still doable. We want to emphasize food that's grown organically or sustainably. Some mom and pop farmers at the farmers markets can't afford the USDA certificate of organic, but they're doing highly biodynamic, excellent farming and sustainable farming. We want to minimize intake of processed and refined food, chemical additives, things that have been only introduced as a grand experiment in the last, say, 50 years or less, and return more to a natural diet. And we want to have balance and variety in our diet. We want to have a variety of tastes, not just sweet and salty, but also pungent and bitter and sour and in the right balance with one another. We want to have a variety of colors that please the eyes, textures, flavors, different cooking methods, and balance those with the seasons. In the winter, more cooked. In the summer, more raw or lightly cooked. And try to achieve balance with our environment, with our seasons, with our conditions. And I would argue that the new 4 food groups, remember the old 4 food groups? They found back during World War II, when recruits from Appalachia were found to have classical deficiency conditions like rickets, they recommended, under the wonderful guidance of the beef industry, the beef and the cattlemen and the dairy industry, the 4 food groups. One of which was meat, the second was dairy, and then of course there were grains, preferably refined into white flour or white sugar or white rice, And then all those other plant foods, fruit, vegetables, et cetera, that was a food group, one food group. And I would say, let's change that around. The new 4 food groups, whole grains, preferably as close to the whole cereal form as possible, like whole brown rice, whole millet, whole quinoa, vegetables, a variety of vegetables, root vegetables, surface vegetables, leafy green vegetables, beans and legumes, not just soybeans, but a whole array of different beans, fruits, seeds, and nuts, and again, as much as possible, locally grown in season. Not coming from South America, Chile, in the middle of our winter, but locally grown here in the summer. And so I was really intrigued by this question of if diet is the thing that is driving these diseases, if diet is the reason that men from China, when they come to the United States, or Japan coming to the United States, the rates of prostate cancer skyrocket, could we do this experiment in reverse? Could we take men who have prostate cancer in this country and put them on the diet or something close to the diet that they're eating in the countries where the rates are really low, and see if we could actually slow or stop the progression of the cancers? So I'm going to be talking about this a little later in the research panel, but just give you a little taste of this right now. It was a pilot study done a few years ago here at UCSD, and we took a group of men whose prostate cancers had recurred in spite of having surgery, and their PSA levels had become detectable. PSA, prostate-specific antigen, normally it's not a great screening test for prostate cancer. It can be confused with other non-cancerous conditions of the prostate, like benign enlargement or prostatitis. But after the prostate has been removed, there's pretty much only one reason for detectable and progressing PSA in the body, and that's cancer cells that have gotten away from the prostate, that were missed by the surgery or were there before the surgery and are spreading in the body. And we can track the rate of increase in the PSA levels and have a pretty good biomarker of what's happening to the rate of growth of the cancer. And what we see here, each of these pairs of bars is a subject. The light blue is before our intervention, what was happening to the cancer, and the dark red is what happened from the beginning to the end. And you see, in most cases, with maybe one exception, everybody had either a stabilization or improvement. That is, their rates of increase in the progression of their cancers either slowed, and in a few cases, you see the 0 line in the very middle there. That means complete stabilization. We see a few people who actually drop down below it, which is suggestive of actual reversal of the cancers. Not a cure, but a shrinkage perhaps in the volume of cancer in the body, and certainly a terrific finding for these men. Now, some people say, yeah, but what do you have to go through to achieve this kind of a result? You know, the food, it tastes like cardboard. It's, you know. Well, I beg to differ. This is a typical Gordon meal. Brown rice with shiitake mushrooms, which, by the way, that's a whole nother literature about the health benefits of medicinal mushrooms like shiitake and maitake, the immune boosting effects, topped off, garnished with a little bit of minced scallion. Now, I love Chinese food, and so I've adapted unhealthy Chinese recipes to healthy ones. Here's one that would be sauteed Chinese greens, topped off with a little bit of garlic. And here's an array of different kinds of beans that we can incorporate in our diet. Brassica vegetables, the cabbage family, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, rich sources of naturally occurring indothiocyanates, naturally occurring indoles, very potent anti-cancer compounds. So just a little vegetable medley. So, and before I mention that, I just want to mention that there's a famous individual, you've all heard of this person, who recently decided to adopt this pattern of eating. And he's very much in the news. His name is Bill Clinton. He was diagnosed with heart disease some years ago. He had bypass surgery, and then he was stented when the atherosclerotic plaques redeveloped and his bypass grafts were starting to clog up. And he's a smart guy and realized that Western medicine could not save him. So he looked up the work of Colin Campbell and Dean Ornish and Caldwell Esselstyn, and discovered that there's a huge literature that shows that you can actually stabilize or reverse heart disease as well. In fact, Caldwell Esselstyn, who is a famous surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, argues that heart disease, he said, is a paper tiger, that it's eminently reversible in lots of people, but with a change in eating, also healthy exercise, stress reduction, other things along with it, but particularly a change in our eating habits. And so Clinton read the works of these folks and decided this was for him. And he's been in the news recently. He's dropped about 25 pounds. He looks much better. And when Wolf Blitzer interviewed him about a year ago on CNN, he had lost all this weight. And he asked him, "Mr. President, are you okay?" And Clinton said he's never felt better. He lost this weight under Chelsea's suggestion. She, I guess, has gone vegan. And the wedding that she had a year ago was a vegan wedding. As, by the way, was the wedding of the royal family of Henry and Kate. And William, yes, Prince William and Kate. I'm sorry, I'm not up on my royals as I should be, but I am up on their eating patterns. And I understand they had a wonderful menu. And I wish I had been there. So how to help your patients get started? We all eat, so it's important to all of us. We need to think about ways that diet could be influencing our patients' health problems and our own. We want to talk to our patients, make it a regular part of our discourse with them. Talk to them about the importance of a healthy diet. It's not something to be taken lightly. This is really, really important. We want to combat these trends that are overtaking our country, and we have to start where we are. We want to learn about the resources around us, our community resources like farmers markets, natural groceries. We have terrific farmers markets in San Diego. We have wonderful natural grocery stores. There's a new restaurant coming to town, Casa de Luz, which is going to be serving breakfast, lunch, dinner every day of the year. It's going to serve hundreds of meals every day, and it'll be whole food, plant-based, one of the healthiest places you'll be able to go to eat in the United States. I mean that seriously, in the entire United States, here in San Diego. And they're going to be offering cooking classes upstairs in their new cooking school. We have wonderful cookbooks available to us. And we need to work on improving our own diets too. Now, I've run into the attitude repeatedly that, I'm not going to name any names, Rusty, but I do remember a case where somebody was describing a patient in a case discussion, and the point was made, they're following a good diet. But we have to look more deeply and ask, what is it really? We have to really understand our patients and what they're doing, and not just take at face value some things that we're told. Actually, Rusty is quite aware of these things, and I don't mean to kid him. I think that Rusty has done an incredible service here at UCSD, not only in launching the Center for Integrative Medicine, but in helping to create a space for us here. So we're going to be offering a couple of things at the Center for Integrative Medicine, ways that we can help. One thing is we're going to be creating a protected space in which patients with different medical conditions can come and have natural healing, natural medicine, and healthy integrative nutrition, plant-based, whole food, plant-based nutrition. And when I say a protected space, that means when a patient comes in here and they have a particular problem, say high blood pressure, hypertension, we're not just going to put them on the diet or suggest to them a diet and out the door. We're going to work them up and find out, are there any red flags here? Is there any acute problem that needs to be dealt with? We're going to make sure the patient is safe. If we need to, we'll put them on medication first. We'll stabilize that blood pressure, bring it to a safe level, and then introduce the healthy diet and lifestyle along with that. As they show increasing ability to control the problem naturally, we'll titrate them off the medication, hopefully with the goal of eventually eliminating altogether the medication. That won't necessarily work for everybody, but I think everybody can take a step in the right direction. So we're also going to be offering whole food, plant-based dietary counseling, not just with physicians, but to work on the actual details, the day-to-day details with registered dietitians who are familiar and experienced with this type of dietary pattern. We're going to be offering, starting this fall, we believe, working with Casa de Luz, a series of diet and cooking classes. So these will be about 8 weeks long. Once a week, a group of people will be meeting at Casa de Luz's state-of-the-art teaching kitchen, which will be able to provide them with a curriculum that Lorraine McElhern pioneered with others at the Cancer Project and have taught to over 60,000 program graduates in over 160 cities around the country. We're doing a modified version of that with Casa de Luz, and we're going to be able to teach this to large groups of patients. We think hundreds, thousands potentially, even in a given year in this new facility. And it'll be here in the North Park section of San Diego, and so we'll certainly get the word out when those classes are ready to start. So basically, to sum this up, integrative nutrition, in my view, is something that involves all aspects of the person. It's not just diet. It's also diet, working with the body, which means exercise, becoming aware, listening to your body and what it tells you about what you're craving for food. Often it's an excellent guide to what you need. If it's telling you you need white sugar, you might want to disregard that part. Let that one go. But interestingly, as you start eating a whole food plant-based diet, you start craving healthy foods, and then listen to those cravings and what they're telling you. Also, we want to work with the mind. We want to work with, on the one hand, reflection and understanding and mindfulness and becoming aware. Again, it's listening to the body and listening to the mind and to the emotions and the whole person and spirit. And on another level, it's working one-on-one, whether it's with friends, a counselor, a therapist, support of groups, of family, of other fellow patients who are dealing with similar issues. All of these things can come together and help us reinforce healthy dietary changes. The healthy dietary changes make it so much easier to make a healthy change in exercise habits. And those create a positive cycle in terms of lifting your mood and helping the clarity of your thought. And so it goes. So I see as the core of integrative medicine are these, it's not so much the things that get done to us, it's the things that we do for ourselves. It's the sort of the heavy lifting of changing your diet, getting exercise, working on smoothing your thinking, your thought processes. And when we do that, and then we reinforce it with the reminder of acupuncture needles, the appropriate use of herbs and supplements, massage therapy, manipulative therapy, and so forth, that's when I think we really can have miraculous improvements in our health. And we're going to be doing research on this. We want to make this a laboratory for research on a number of health problems. And so I think our Center for Integrative Medicine is going to be a remarkable change, a first change, I hope, that's going to spread out beyond UCSD to our community and to the rest of our society in time. And again, I think diet is an essential, not the only, but an essential component of this. So, thank you.